So our next speaker is going to pick up this story of this long emergency that we've really been in. His name is Rex Weyler. He's one of the founders of Greenpeace, and by being one of the founders of Greenpeace, in many ways, he really is one of the founders of the worldwide ecological movement. So, Rex.
Thank you so much, Moses. My pleasure. So, thank you, everyone. I'm honored to be here. I also want to thank the Mississauga and the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee people, upon whose traditional territories we are here today. And I was born on the prairies, not the Canadian prairies, but south of Saskatchewan and Wyoming. Here I am. You can see at age 5, I was already depleting the Earth's resources. We loved fishing, and when I was a bit older, about 11, living in Oklahoma, my brothers and I went outside the edge of town and found this pond, or a pond similar to this, far enough from the edge of town that it seemed untouched and pristine, and we knew it was a good fishing hole, so sure enough, within 10 minutes, we caught the biggest channel catfish we'd ever seen, and within a couple hours, we had a whole stringer full. We brought these fish home, and we just felt so proud to bring food home to our family, and my mother cooked up a big catfish dinner, and we felt great about it, and we spent the whole summer fishing at this pond. And of course, through the course of the summer, the fish got smaller and smaller, until one day, we spent a whole day fishing in this pond, and didn't catch anything. We'd fished it out, 2 little boys, in one summer. And I remember standing on the edge of this pond, at age 11, realizing, oh, okay, there's a limit. Not only is there a limit to it, but you can get to that limit. And when you get there, the pond doesn't just create more catfish overnight. Now, I was asked to speak today about the environmental situation. How bad is it really? I notice in the program I'm called a pessimist, which I take great resentment to that. But I understand the arc of the week. So let's talk about the way the world is. But I'm a naturally hopeful person. I do this kind of research all day long, and I can tell you sometimes my heart breaks at the information that I discover. And yet I'm still hopeful. So I suggest we all bring our own optimism to this. Don't expect the data to make you feel optimistic. And remember, hope is a great frame of mind, but hope is not a strategy. And in the autumn, when the winds are chilly and the leaves start falling, it's not pessimism to point out that winter's coming. So let's look at some of the data. Now, forests. How are we doing with the forests? Well, there used to be 6 billion hectares of forests on the planet. Now there's about 3, so we're halfway through the forest by land area. But of course, we high grade everything, take all the best stuff first, take all the big trees and the best trees. So if we think in terms of actually standing timber, we're about 80% through the world's forests. And this is what we're doing to them. We're burning them down. We're creating agriculture land, which then eventually we degrade. This is Noemi Cruz from the Guarani people in Argentina, and this is what we're doing to her land. She's watching her land disappear and her culture disappear. Now the people, 85 or 15% of the people, us, the wealthy people, the wealthy 15% of the world are using 85% of the resources. So where are we getting all those resources? We're getting it from all over the world. So that the 85% of the people who are poor are making do with 15% of the resources. And as Vandana Shiva points out, the poor of the world are not poor because they're stupid, they're not poor because they're uneducated, they're poor because they have been robbed, because their resources have been taken. We also export our dirtiest industries, our toxic industries. This is an ash dump from one coal-fired power plant in China. Now, this is our waste because we finance it and we buy the products. We export our manufacturing. This is a 4-year-old girl in China dying from lead poisoning. This happens also in Canada, where we allowed pulp mills to dump mercury into the rivers through the Grassy Narrows Reserve, where people suffered from mercury poisoning. This is happening all over the world. The toxins in our environment have not decreased in spite of all our environmental movement. 40 years of environmental movement. How about the marine mammals? When Greenpeace started to save seals and whales in the 1970s, the marine mammals were down to about 5% of their peak herds. They've recovered somewhat because of the environmental legislation and are now at about 10% of their peak herds. We've taken 90% of the marine mammals. How about the fish? Estimates vary, but we're about, for the major commercial species, we're about 60 to 90% through the fish species. In North America, we've reduced the carbon content of our soils from about 6% carbon to 3% carbon. We've mined half the carbon out of our soils. And of course, on top of that, we've drained the aquifers, we've polluted the water tables, and we wash 26 billion tons of soil into the ocean every year, along with our fertilizers and our toxins, and create dead zones in the oceans. Deserts are growing at about 6 million hectares per year. The forests are shrinking at about 16 million hectares per year. Figured out, you live on a planet where the forests are shrinking, the deserts are growing. I would be concerned. How about species? We lose a species now at a rate faster than any time since the asteroid hit the Earth and the dinosaurs perished 64 million years ago. We're the asteroid. We are the asteroid now. We lose a species about every 20 minutes. So while I'm up here speaking to you, another species blinks out of existence forever. And that goes on day and night, and that'll go on all week. And while all the other speakers are up here, in 20 minutes, we lose another species off the planet. Forever. We're about halfway through the bees in North America. And we're now experiencing colony collapse in Europe, and in Asia, we see this as well. The coral, we're going to lose the coral. We're 50% through the coral now. The seas are 30% more acidic than they were 50 years ago. It just doesn't look like the coral's going to survive. It's my feeling that what we're doing is we're destroying the real wealth, which are rivers and forests and diversity, for this fake wealth, this money. And what do we do when we get rich? We buy more stuff. I believe we're destroying the real wealth, and I believe that our growth is destroying the real wealth. Let's look at some examples of sustainability in the world. Now, in 1944, the U.S. government, U.S. military, took 29 reindeer to St. Matthew's Island to feed the soldiers. The war ended. They didn't need the island. They left the island. They left the reindeer. Good thing for the reindeer. They loved it. They had no predators on the island. Party, party, party. Lots of lichen, lots of grass. Some biologists went back in the late 50s and found 1,350 reindeer partying on, having a great time. But the island has a capacity. Every habitat in the world, including the planet itself, has a capacity, a biocapacity based on how much solar energy is converted to biomass, which the species can consume. The reindeer blew right past, you'll see the red line, the reindeer blew right past the capacity of that island. The biologists figured that the island could support about 2,000 reindeer. Party, 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 kept on going, kept on going. You can overshoot a habitat by quite a bit. The reindeer overshot this habitat by 3 times, 6,000 reindeer in 1966, and in one winter, they perished. They'd eaten all the food. They crashed down to 42 and eventually perished. And we say they're just dumb animals. So let's look at a human example. There's many human examples, by the way, Mesopotamia, etc. This is Easter Island. You can see that Easter Island had a capacity, had a beautiful forest and a lagoon full of fish. The people denuded the forest to roll these big stone statues around. fished out the lagoon and crashed. They also grew to about 3 times the capacity of the island before they crashed. Here's the interesting thing. Most of the stone statues on Easter Island are still in the quarry half carved. They could not stop what they were doing even as they cut down the last tree. They were delusional to the end. Now, can you overshoot a planet? Yeah, if you keep growing, you can. Here's some growth curves of things we consume. This is our population growth, the damming of rivers, various resources that we consume. But I want to draw your attention to this one. Paper. Remember how computers were going to save paper? Today we use 300 million tons of paper a year, 6 times the paper we used in 1950 before the computer revolution. Computers do not save paper. Our technological efficiencies do not save resources. In economics, we call that the rebound effect. We also call that the Jevons effect. We know that when we gain efficiencies, resources become cheaper. We use more of them, not less. So if you think we're going to get out of this by inventing some new efficiency, history's not on our side. Here's some more sweeping curves. The growth of our consumption of stuff. Water, paper, soil, phosphorus, oil, coal, liquid fuels, copper, etc. Now, we can add up and sum these curves, and you don't need to be a mathematician to do it. You can eyeball it. You could probably all draw the curve in your mind. This is what it looks like. This is our growth since 1750 of consumption of resources. It's a 3.5% growth curve. At a 3.5% growth, that's a doubling time of 20 years. So in the 200 years between 1750 and 1950, we doubled 10 times. That's 1,000 times growth. By 1950, we were using 1,000 times more resources than we were in 1750. Now, this doubling time thing is very important because by 1970, we doubled again, using 2,000 times the stuff we were using in 1750. By 1990, we doubled again, 4,000 times. We are now using about 8,000 times the resources that humanity used in 1750. We have overshot the Earth's capacity. There have been many studies done. The original one was done in 1980. The most current studies being done by Bill Reese at the University of British Columbia suggest that we're about 50% overshoot. We use 50% more resources every year than the Earth can replenish. Then this is the stuff: the copper, the steel, the iron ore, the fish, the trees, the electronic junk. Our electronic revolution has a giant footprint. So here we are. We're growing our economies. We want to grow our economies 3 or 4% per year worldwide. We're growing our consumption of stuff at 3.5%. We think we're going to save ourselves with efficiency. We've never done it before. But let's say that we have a technological miracle and we reduce our growth of consumption. We keep growing our economies. There's this talk about decoupling the economy from consumption. So let's say we actually do a historically unprecedented thing and reduce our growth in consumption from 3.5% to 1%. Well, at 1%, the doubling time is 70 years. So in 70 years, here we are. You don't have to be a mathematician. You can look at this chart. You can see that the amount of stuff we're going to use in the next 70 years at 1% growth, it doesn't exist. We're already 90% through the fish. We're already 60, 70, 80% through the forests. Where's this stuff going to come from? And even if we were able to do it with the declining capacity of the Earth, and by the way, technology does not increase capacity. Technology does not increase the carrying capacity of our environment, which some people have claimed. Technology allows us to use up that capacity faster. All growth scenarios, once you are past the overshoot point, all growth scenarios lead to collapse. This is nature's way. This happens all the time in nature. Predator-prey relationships going like this all the time. The wolves overshoot the deer, they crash, the deer come back, the wolves go back, so forth. But if you try to continue to grow, once you're in overshoot, you will collapse. The further you grow, the more you collapse. The only way to be sustainable in any habitat that we know of, that we have ever studied, is to live below the capacity of that habitat. There are no examples in nature, 0 examples in nature of sustainable growth. Sustainable growth is an oxymoron. It does not exist, not in nature. You have to live below the capacity. So the ideas we need are not necessarily big ideas. Maybe the ideas we need are small ideas, little ideas. This is my friend in British Columbia, Merv Wilkinson. He lived on this land for 70 years. He logged this land for 50 years. And the day he died, a few years ago, he had more standing timber on his land than the day that he bought it. Now that, my friends, is sustainability. And one day I was walking through this forest with Merv, and he was explaining all these systems that he had. And he turned to me and he said, "You know, Rex, it's really simple. Just cut below the growth rate. If you cut below the growth rate, your forest is growing." You can't cheat nature. We can mock the environmentalists, we can call us pessimists, but I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist. I don't mind being mocked, but nature shall not be mocked. There are rules. I think we need ordinary heroes. I think we need people who will stand up in front of their communities and speak the truth and not be intimidated by the consequences of having a conscience. And I believe that if we do that, and if we treat the natural world as a sacred thing, not turning every river and every forest and every resource into cash, but loving nature, treating it as sacred. I believe this is a sacred path we are on. Sustainability is about being in relationship. The changes we need to make are not inventing new things. Sustainability, what sustains itself in nature, not things. We all die. Species go in and out of life. It's relationships that sustain themselves in nature. And what we have to do to be sustainable is to change our relationship with nature, to love it, to treat it as sacred, to treat it as valuable as it is, as it stands, not thinking, wow, if we built a power plant on that river, we could make a bunch of money. And if we do that, if we humble ourselves, and if we treat nature with respect and love it, then if that winter comes, if we have to live with less stuff, I'm not worried about my children having less stuff. I'm worried about my children living in a world that is heating up and is going through ecological collapse and political chaos. Those are real worries. Having less stuff, we don't need all this stuff. Then when the winter comes, we'll be fine. And I promise you, and I guarantee you, that if we humble ourselves to nature, and if we treat nature as sacred, we'll be fine. We may have some hard times. Are we afraid of hard times? I'm not. Thank you very much.